It is difficult not to think about how to go about to defend yourself from violence when talking about physical safety. Though the topic is about much more, it is the easiest to understand without prior knowledge about the topic. You understand what it entails from the name alone. Back in the 80s and 90s, there was this perceived risk of being jumped by ninjas in broad daylight. Also, quicksand was a thing. But that's for another episode. How would we protect ourselves from these PJ hitmen? Or is it hit people? Although we live in modern civilized societies in many parts of the world, some of them even being wealthy democracies, we have never been able to rise above our biological urges and knee-jerk reactions, which might result in violence when extreme and unchecked. Though the type of violence that is the most common varies by country and even locally to particular areas of a city, the consequences are the same. If not fatal, an attack can leave permanent damage and change the whole life trajectory of a person, even affecting all the people that care about the victim or just learn about the attack and fears for a similar fate. Preparedness does not necessarily equal fear. Sometimes we want to be prepared or work with identified risks, not out of fear, but for the freedom you gain by not having to think about it all the time due to the structured and systematic approach used to manage the risks. By dedicating time to planning and preparing, we free up mental space that we can use for more fun stuff. The mental preparedness is thus more realistic and practical than living with fear or spending resources on symbolic security that creates a false sense of safety. The threat of experiencing violence is something that we all can relate to, though the severity of it can vary. Everything from schoolyard bullying to violence in the privacy of the home, to robberies in rough neighborhoods, to straight up systematic violence by governments or other nations in conflict zones. Sometimes we are violent preemptively so that we are not ourselves exposed to the violence. Violence is not only the actual act of striking someone, but the explicit or implicit underlying threat of what could happen if not complying. A study from 2018 found that people feel exposed outside in a public space, no matter the features of imposed safety measures such as lighting levels, physical obstructions, and/or potential hiding spaces. Although poor or lacking lighting heightened fear despite generally having low crime levels, as well as showing that different types of lighting does not increase safety. A common reaction to potential threats in the studied areas was to run away from the situation. Secondly was picking up a weapon or fight back. Despite perceiving human presence in one of the scenarios, there was no increased tendency to call for help. This finding suggests directional understanding of the environment being of higher importance than alerts and warning of where to be wary of danger. A mobile phone was noted to be used as a personal safety measure by most. In 2 of the 3 scenarios, a mobile phone was preferred to a weapon as a safety device. This indicates that carrying weapons does not automatically heighten a sense of security, but carrying a mobile phone, although having little physical ability to actually protect a person, can alter perception of safety. Another common denominator was the unwillingness to take conscious precautions before venturing into a potentially dangerous place. Not going somewhere alone was the standout in a scenario that is perceived as especially dangerous, prompting a heightened environmental awareness and need to protect oneself. Another study from 2024 looked at the self-protection coping mode used to conserve resources, COR, during extreme and enduring stressors, noting 3 coping strategies when resources are severely stretched or exhausted. Mainly moving away from, moving against, or moving towards others. Also identify that even in self-protection mode, involved people engage in resource reinvestment activities to regain control of and rebuild resources. The moving away from others group withdrew from others and the world, retreating into the self, ignoring social feedback and information, avoiding social contact, and disconnecting emotionally from the situation. This achieved self-protection by closing off the source of the stress, them being news, people, and the world. By retreating into a smaller and safer existence, they could stop the mental drain and create a moderate sense of control. This was likened to tactics such as retreating, regrouping, and standing by for help or for stressors to lessen. The moving against others group asserted and acted upon the perceived wrongful approach to the situations by others. This was done by critiquing others and refusing to conform. Hostilities showed to institutions, leaders, and governments, or any entity responsible for the specific situation. The desire to reassert some level of autonomy over a difficult situation is using anger as a mobilizer of action to regain control over resources at an unpredictable time. It also works to reestablish a sense of self-esteem by protecting the vulnerable or denying the decisions of authorities. The moving towards others group demonstrated positive feelings, thoughts, and actions towards others and put trust in experts and those in charge. Alliances were built, and a sense of satisfaction and esteem was obtained through engaging with community groups and neighbors. Joy and faith over humanity prevailed. By using this strategy for building and strengthening resources, the social support and self-protection increased. Coping when living in violent environments. A study from 2010 investigated how community-dwelling youth perceived exposure to violence and how available resources were identified and used. A discussion was held about the implications of constant vigilance and exquisite sensitivity to stressors of chronic neighborhood violence. Themes that emerged were strategies for navigating safe and unsafe places, using neighborhood and individual resources to cope with stressors and a high level of vigilance. Distinctions in when a place is safe or unsafe might be connected to time of day, certain activity, gathering of people, lack of people, recent happenings, and so on. A conscious effort is made to make a nuanced assessment of the level of safety of a place, following with various strategies to stay safe based on the assessment, such as going with someone else, not at night, don't bumping into anybody, avoiding certain clocks, avoiding recreation center during certain activities, and so on. Danger can be contained by identifying unsafe microenvironments within the neighborhoods by minimizing exposure to them. Grown-up role models help youth how to navigate provocation and violence, minimizing the risks even more. Another study from 2025 looked at groups that experienced disproportionately high rates of firearm violence and related structural disadvantages that shapes the psychological and practical responses to violence related to stressors. These intersecting exposures influence coping strategies, mental health, help-seeking behaviors, and broader social functioning. The findings underscore the dynamic interaction between environmental stressors, available resources, and cognitive appraisals, indicating that coping strategies are neither static nor inherently adaptive or maladaptive. One overhanging risk of living in high exposure to violence is that the coping strategies available might make you perpetuate the violence, keeping you within the triangle of trauma, concurrently experiencing violence as victims, perpetrators, and witnesses. Symptoms of chronic and complex post-traumatic stress and trauma might include hypervigilance, persistent heightened alertness, emotional numbness, negative future orientations, and pervasive sense of fatalism. Emotional desensitization, used as an avoidance strategy, may provide temporary relief from distress. If habitual, however, can exacerbate emotional disengagement, dysregulation, and increase risk of externalizing behaviors such as aggressions and violence. These findings reveal a spectrum of coping patterns employed that fit into 4 categories: problem-focused adaptive coping, problem-focused maladaptive coping, emotion-focused adaptive coping, and emotion-focused maladaptive coping. Starting with the first one, being problem-focused adaptive coping, PFA. Strategies that provide structure, control, and an outlet for managing stressors. Intentional engagement in sports and physical activities emerge as a dominant coping strategy. For emotional regulation, stress reduction, identity reinforcement, These activities help manage frustration and momentarily escape the pressures of their environment. If done right, it was constructive, not used to avoid confronting stressors, as it might reinforce avoidance-based coping patterns. Creative expression emerged as another strategy. Drawing, visual arts, music, and writing as outlets for processing emotions and regaining control. Use of creative media to facilitate coping indicates that culturally embedded practices, such as music and artistic expression, can reinforce resilience and identity when exposed to adversity. Peer networks often work as sources of coping support. They provide a critical buffer against emotional distress, act as a protective factor against overthinking and negative rumination. These coping strategies demonstrate a high degree of adaptability, the intent shaping the effectiveness as well as the surrounding context and the duration of use. Be aware that excessive co-rumination with peers experiencing similar adversity may result in emotional stagnation or reinforce distress. Now to the problem-focused maladaptive coping, PFM, including retaliatory violence, flexible definition of coping, not framed entirely as impulsive and maladaptive, but as responses to environmental realities. Rather than being purely motivated by aggression, retaliation was used as a strategy for self-preservation and maintaining respect in the social environment, similar to street justice norms. By asserting any type of coping as neutral coping, the maladaptive practice of feeding the violence cycle is justified and creates a resistance to take morality into account as the end justifies the means. Now to the emotion-focused adaptive coping, EFA. Internal emotion regulation strategies that help manage distress include humor, peer engagement, spirituality, and mindfulness, which offer mechanisms for emotional relief while reinforcing a sense of personal agency in navigating adversity. Humor works as emotional alleviation, helps evade stressors, reestablish a sense of normalcy temporarily by serving as a resilient reframing mechanism and allowing to maintain emotional balance even in the face of hardship. Emotional anchoring through prayer and spirituality creates a sense of meaning in the face of adversity. Use of practices to ground oneself creates greater emotional regulation and resilience. Contemplative practices such as meditation and spending time in quiet environments help to regulate emotions by reflecting and disconnecting. There are models such as mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT. And lastly, the emotion-focused maladaptive coping, or EFM. Practices that provide temporary relief but reinforce long-term distress patterns and hinder the development of adaptive coping are classified as EFM. These strategies involve self-reliance, emotional avoidance, cognitive distraction, disengagement, service avoidance shaped by systemic access, stigma, collective help-seeking culture beyond individual and personal factors. A core feature was the reluctance to share emotional struggles with family or external support systems, reinforcing patterns of self-reliance and emotional suppression. This withholding of struggles was despite recognizing the potential benefits of support. The narrative reflects a protective mechanism hiding emotions, distancing from deeper conversations, making distress to avoid appearing vulnerable and reinforce norms of stoicism and self-reliance. If peer networks are used as primarily distractions and not for deeper emotional engagement, it becomes maladaptive. The interactions are not used for emotional expression or support, rather as buffer against intrusive thoughts and emotional overwhelm offering relief. Peer interactions with low-stakes conversations and avoiding emotional topics, minimizing vulnerability. Digital escapism through social media platforms or other sites may lead to long-term negative outcomes such as increased distress and problematic behaviors. Reluctance to seek formal mental health reports due to deep-seated distrust of therapists and professional mental health services reflects concerns about cultural mismatch, lack of shared lived experiences, experiential alignment, and skepticism regarding confidentiality. Alternatives to this might be mentorships by role models and experiential learning, such as traveling, field trips, skill building workshops, and outdoor activities as coping tools. Protection from violence at home. A study from 2024 explores the effects of domestic violence on surviving mothers and their subjective experiences. Being one of the most prevalent forms of violence against women, it can take many shapes, such as physical violence, sexual violence, and/or psychological abuse. Psychological abuse can come in the form of insults, constant humiliation, intimidation, threats of harm, threats to take away children, controlling behavior, isolating a person from family and friends, monitoring their movement, and restricting access to financial resources, employment, education, and medical care. Using fear, power, and lack of knowledge, abusers use coercive tactics to maintain control. The use of threat of violence is also used as a barrier to escape, the target not only being the victim but also the people they care about. The final straw that made many survivors spring to action and finally leave were three main reasons. The violence was starting to direct towards the children. The children had tried to protect their mothers from violence, and lastly, they aimed to uphold the children's psychological well-being and that of their own. Resilience bolstered by social support might position the victim in a better way to manage the impact of domestic violence. Another study from 2024 explores women's experiences of escaping domestic violence to achieve safe housing. The themes were experiences of leaving domestic violence, the losses, ongoing contact with the perpetrator, barriers to achieving safe housing, financial insecurity, being judged by others for leaving, service availability, facilitators to achieve safe housing, support, partnership, and collaboration between women and service providers, feeling respected and heard, the road to recovery, being a good mother, empowerment after leaving domestic violence. Apart from highlighting the need for service and health care to work together with and collaborate with the person experiencing and escaping domestic violence, the study also points to the importance of access to the educational resources and services, as well as tailoring the support to the context of the person affected. Some results and implications. Though the situation might be experienced as grim and without a way out when facing domestic violence, many examples of successful victims that managed to get free say otherwise. Analyzing your specific situation, using the tools at your disposal and what tools you can acquire, preparing your escape and tailoring the solution according to your need, positions you well for enduring and eventually escaping a dire situation. Combining goals with strategy and tactics will move you closer and closer to the goalposts leading to your freedom. Having this in place makes it mentally easier to be resilient, as you know you're working towards a way out and are not stuck indefinitely. Find the motivating factor that creates the spark needed for you to spring to action. Some personal stories. I was a mild-mannered kid with good intentions and a strong sense of right and wrong. I was raised to do right by my peers. I can count the times I faltered easily, as it has cost me a lot of strong feelings of shame, the times that I didn't uphold my principles. I was also fascinated with martial arts and started with the karate around age 6. Through my training, I gained a calm mind that helped me navigate the turbulent teenage years. Apart from allowing me to test my physical limits, it also let me get used to being uncomfortable, both physically and mentally. This made me more resilient to the urges of the ego that usually puts us in not so favorable situations. By evading dangerous situations or diffusing escalating ones, I managed to solve everything without the use of violence. The point is that the rational and calm mindset I gained by doing martial arts kept me out of trouble. I never had to use any of the self-defense techniques I had been honing all those years in different disciplines. It was the knowledge of what I was capable of that kept me calm. I never felt I had to prove anything when being provoked. I knew my limits and stopped being driven by fear. At my last dojo, I never even bothered with advancing ranks, as I knew exactly what I was there for, honing the basics. By having a beginner mindset, letting go of prestige and ego, you can face any fear you have, embrace it and start understanding it, leading the way to mastering it, and eventually you can start nurturing it. As there is an evolutionary reason for feeling fear, It is as natural as any other emotion. When you master it, you use fear as a signal of something not being right, or that something is up, and you use it to calculate the situation and your actions. It becomes a part of your intuition and stops manipulating and controlling you. Some limitations. Not everyone has the interest of practicing self-defense or martial arts. Not everyone has had the opportunity to express, experiment, and develop their feelings in a safe manner. Each and every one have a unique personal journey and circumstances that regulate how much you are allowed to grow before presented with an obstacle that needs to be conquered. If you are faced with something you are not mature or prepared enough to face, there is a high risk of this leaving deep marks on your psyche. Extreme cases might be diagnosed as trauma or even creating phobias. There are countless stories of people not being able to stand up for themselves until their limit is reached. The problem with waiting to stop something until you explode and might hurt someone is that the damage caused might be beyond what you feel comfortable taking responsibility for. Failing to stop or steer the situation until the last drop filled you with rage and caused an outburst is simply put a lack of control. There are so many things in life that are beyond our control that it might feel overwhelming to think about how to create control over your own safety. For us to be able to face all life's surprises, we need a couple of things. A safe space, that is the place where we can rest, contemplate, lick wounds, and make plans. This place needs to be protected at all costs. Structured contemplation needs to be done to identify what areas in your life where the lack of control makes you unsafe and impacts your quality of life. Dedicated time for making plans for how to increase the control that is at your disposal or developing your ability to face the previously identified areas. While evading hostile situations can be used as a tactic, it is not a strategy, as you need to be prepared to face the problems head on from time to time. Remember to differentiate real threats and perceived ones. Understanding your own limits will help you make sure that you don't bite off more than you can chew. As with building muscle, you need to be in the range that is close enough for your abilities to handle the situation in a safe manner. This means you need to train and practice in an intelligent way, improving your skills incrementally to eventually reach a desired level where you trust your own capabilities and can be calm in situations that previously caused a lot of anxiety. Your specific situation decides what tools you need and your opportunity to get access to them. Reality does not follow any particular rules of justice or fairness, so you will be challenged and thrown in the deep end from time to time. Hopefully, you have gathered enough skills by then to learn how to swim and adapt at a moment's notice, or you will risk drowning. Some actionable advice. While starting with weightlifting, cardio, endurance, and any form of self-defense is a good way to lead you to the headspace required for improving your abilities, there is something that is more important to have in place first. When push comes to shove, you have to be mentally prepared to hurt another human being if your own safety is on the line. A well-adjusted grown-up will naturally be inclined to solve problems through any other means than violence. We just don't want to hurt others. And that is what makes us empathetic social creatures that have managed to build societies that can take care of our vulnerable groups. When those values and your life are threatened, we need to be prepared to protect them by standing up to the oppressors. How to apply this then? By looking inwards and understanding what really matters in your life, you clarify what values you need to balance fear and courage with to live a fulfilling life. Which parts of your life are you willing to protect by exposing yourself to situations that make you uncomfortable, anxious, ridiculed, scared, or that make your life complicated or even threats of what you hold dear? Any tools or abilities you might have are totally worthless if you haven't made an active decision on where you draw the line for what you allow others to do to you or put you through. You need the line to automate the signal of when to spring to action. To summarize, identify important aspects of your life. Draw your lines for the limits of your compromises. Map your insecurities. Understand what you need to gain control in these areas. Add to your tool set and improve your abilities to a level where you feel comfortable with your limits, i.e., your form on both a good and a bad day. Some key points. If you have time to prepare, work on the skills that will suit you in your specific situation. Do this without losing what makes you special. If you are already in this situation, start structuring the goal. Where do you want to be in the foreseeable future? What strategies do you need to achieve this? What tactical skills do you need to hone to give you a leg up when facing violence? Improvise, adapt, overcome. Some final thoughts. Few of life's experiences are timeless. This means that suffering is not eternal. This also means that we have agency in everything we do. Write your own destiny. Do not let others dictate your essence and spirit. If not for yourself or for the people who care for you, at least do it out of spite for your tormentor. Make them suffer. Nurture your connections to your communities and people. You never know when you or someone you care about might need it. If you want to support us, you can try out our Almir app. You will find it on either app store. If you're not interested in the software, but you want to support us in other ways, you could join our community forum. Or you could like and comment on this episode. That will help us out a bunch. Take care of yourselves and your peers. See you in the next episode.